The ancient Chinese curse says, "May you live in interesting times." And the Mandarin character for the word crisis is actually a joining of two distinct characters, one representing danger and the other opportunity. But any person who has majored in economics, like former U.S. Ambassador Don Beyer, a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of the elite Williams College, knows that for every opportunity, there is also an opportunity lost, measured in opportunity cost and the consequence of choosing one opportunity over the other. Similarly, the multitudinous seas described by one Shakespearean character as transformed in Carnadine, making the green one red, present for seafarers both a picture of beauty, which often betrays the dangers of its power and the perils that lurk beneath its waves. Such was the attraction in two films of recent vintage, titled Open Water and Open Water 2, dramatizing real-life dramas of tourists seeking adventure who, transfixed by the wonder and beauty, were lulled into a false sense of security that eventually brought their demise. I'm a retired Army Ranger who worked in strategic counterintelligence during interesting times in the 1990s after the first Gulf War. And with that experience, viewing the current pandemic crisis, I'm a bit better equipped than some to assess the coverage that is available, and have found that there's a lot of fake news on the left, but also on the right. But the critical difference, in my estimation, is that the left is definitely attempting to use the crisis to a dangerous advantage. But you can make your own conclusion. So what is presented here can be confirmed in the open source environment using your own standard search engine of your choice. And all of this information is carefully discovered by myself from what are acknowledged as credible sources by most, for you to make an independent judgment as to whether to believe or not to believe, and draw your own conclusions therefrom. According to a report dated April 8th, 2020 by Josh Margolin and James Gordon Meek of ABC News, as far back as late November, U.S. intelligence officials were warning that a contagion was sweeping through China's Wuhan region, changing the patterns of life and business and posing a threat to the population, according to 4 sources briefed on the secret reporting. An effort was made to bolster the credibility of this story by featuring contributions from former Clinton White House aide George Stephanopoulos, former Deputy Assistant Defense Secretary Mick Mulroy, and John Cohen, a former employee of the Department of Homeland Security with responsibilities for intelligence oversight. The news story goes on to suggest that concerns about what is now known to be the novel coronavirus pandemic were detailed in a November intelligence report by the military's National Center for Medical Intelligence, NCMI, according to 2 officials familiar with the document's contents, and admits that the report was the result of analysis of wire and computer intercepts, coupled with satellite images, information about which you generally would not share with the country from where you are obtaining information. Otherwise, you would not be using those means, it being classified at the time. So immediately the reader is informed by critical reading that covert means were used to obtain the alleged information regarding an out-of-control disease that would pose a serious threat to U.S. forces in Asia, but about which the Chinese government was apparently unaware, as according to the World Health Organization, WHO, COVID-19 timeline, it was not until December 31st, 2020, that China reported a cluster of cases of pneumonia in Wuhan, Hubei province, and a novel coronavirus was eventually identified. That is the passage of at least a month and a half. The news story concedes that NCMI is a component of the Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency, and that together the agency's core responsibilities are to ensure U.S. military forces have the information they need to carry out their missions both offensively and defensively. Because, and this is their quote, it is a critical priority for the Pentagon to keep American service members healthy on deployments. However, the ABC report concludes regarding the NCMI report that it paints a picture of an American government that could have ramped up mitigation and containment efforts far earlier to prepare for a crisis poised to come home. So pleased to catch the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, being quoted as saying, "I don't know." George Stephanopoulos, during a time of pandemic crisis, posted his pointed question on his Twitter account. Did the Pentagon receive an intelligence assessment on COVID in China last November from the National Center for Medical Intelligence? Yet, as a former senior-level White House staffer, George knows, or should know, that the military is restricted in what it can do with regard to civilian matters, operating under the constraints of the Posse Comitatus Act. And the NMIC is the successor of the Clinton administration's Armed Forces Medical Intelligence Center, formerly co-located at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, with the 10th Special Forces Group. And according to Department of Defense Directive 6420.1, dated September 30th, 1996, paragraph D2A, the mission of the AFMIC was stated thusly: sole responsibility within the Department of Defense for producing finished intelligence on foreign military and civilian medical capabilities, infectious disease and environmental health risks, and scientific and technical developments in biotechnology and biomedical subjects of military importance. Additional missions include managing the medical aspects of the DoD Foreign Materiel Program, and accomplishing such other production assignments as are tasked by the Director, DIA. All military. Yet, every senior staff person in this activity is either a senior medical command officer or a senior personnel command officer for the respective joint services. And accordingly, it must be reasonably concluded from the mission that any intelligence derived from obviously covert means regarding information that even the Chinese government refused to release until the end of December was of specific value not to national domestic health concerns, but rather matters entirely within the military, which did not report its first infection from COVID-19 until February 26, 2020. A 23-year-old soldier stationed at Camp Carroll in Daegu within an infection hotspot in the Republic of South Korea, and who was recently released from quarantine after 49 days, according to a recent story on military.com, which also reported that of a total of 2,486 U.S. service members who have been confirmed to have coronavirus, there have been 2 deaths and 446 recoveries. Only 24 cases of those arose in Daegu, where the first was reported, a remarkable success for a hotspot so close to China, which is far below the success of persons in the hotspots of Fairfax County and Arlington County in the Commonwealth of Virginia, where probably the highest incidence of government public health workers reside. It is important to emphasize in analysis of this information that had DIA had a report obtained through covert interception of Chinese traffic, as ABC claims, in November, especially regarding a pandemic pathogen that the Chinese did not admit until December 31st, it would have been, by law, limited to U.S. forces and not to the rest of the nation. That's simply the way that it works under the Constitution and the law. Such alert would have to, by law, arise from civilian sources like incident reports from the Peace Corps, the State Department, or CDC Global, none of which to date have come forward confirming that they observed any such activity in the central mainland of China, probably because they do not have the capability to perform covert interceptions of foreign traffic, which generally tends to be defense-related and national security. And the genomic profile, moreover, of this novel coronavirus, as well as other virologic similarities to the SARS virus that emerged in Hong Kong in 2003, raised very serious suspicions that COVID-19 was in fact a biological weapon that was at least accidentally released. This question has been raised to George Stephanopoulos and ABC News, but they have yet to provide a response. However, the World Health Organization preliminary report dated January 23rd, as I have addressed repeatedly to WHO and Senator Mark Warner, provides validating intelligence that at least after escaping the Hubei province, the pathogen has defied epidemiological proliferation patterns for spread of infection. At footnote 3 of that preliminary report, published before their January 31st report that declared a novel coronavirus to be a public health emergency of international concern, or PHEIC, there is a link to a prediction analysis report you can easily locate on the internet, dated January 20th and prepared by researchers who reasonably hypothesize that if the pathogen somehow escaped lockdowns in China and escaped Wuhan by air, it would be through an infected host carrier traveling to at least one of the top 15 destinations. However, the report upon which WHO relied and the WHO, World Health Organization preliminary report, discussed the array of the proliferation at the time, what they saw looking out their window, ignoring the fact that China's avowed enemy, South Korea, Iran, which is South Korea's trade partner since 2016, and Italy were not on that top 15 destinations list upon which they based their report, which at least raises suspicion because most viruses do not make travel itinerary choices that defy the travel plans of other travelers at an international airport. And it is interesting that they somehow have never mentioned this discrepancy. This point was raised to WHO in March, but they have yet to provide a response. The pathogen, upon entry into the United States, similarly avoided the top international airport in Trans-Pacific Flight, LAX, preferring, for whatever reason, SeaTac. That's a little odd for a virus in normal epidemiology. Similarly, the virus made a preference for Logan over JFK when crossing the Atlantic. This, too, is odd behavior. If you have a virus making odd travel decisions not once, not twice, but at least 3 times in succession, and it has continued to do so since then, the reasonable person and intelligence analyst would conclude that it either has a brain unto itself or is being deployed by a bad actor, an enemy of the United States. These points have been raised as questions to former U.S. Ambassador Congressman Don Beyer, Senator Tim Kaine, who sits on the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator Mark Warner, the ranking Democrat member of the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence, and Governor Ralph Northam, a former Army surgeon who is currently a named defendant in litigation we initiated on April 2nd with some difficulty in the Circuit Court for the city of Alexandria. But for unknown reasons, Governor Northam has failed to respond to attempts by the sheriff to serve process of the complaint, which generally is indicative of evasion of a summons, which is good cause for a prosecution under 18 U.S.C. Section 1512 for obstruction of justice, and which carries a potential penalty of fine and or up to 20 years in prison. If these facts, beyond a reasonable doubt, support a conclusion that these persons acted even in acquiescence with an offensive action by the Chinese government, which to date has resulted in the deaths of almost 180,000 persons worldwide, over 45,000 American citizens, and over 300 in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the criminal consequences are very serious. And again, Governor Northam, who implemented a state lockdown order that has resulted in the explosion of what had been 2% unemployment, or just 2,700 unemployment claims, to over 46,000 immediately after the publication of its lockdown order, and which is projected to double by arrival of the summer, would have placed us in a disadvantaged position in an offensive attack by an enemy of the United States, and would be prosecutable under very serious federal charges. And he has, for almost a month, refused to acknowledge that he has been summoned to appear as a defendant in a civil action that challenges the lawfulness of his drastic order in response to a public health concern for a pathogen that is not even classified as a local epidemic by the Centers for Disease Control, a factor which we are also raising to the American Medical Association for removing his medical license to practice. You are free to make whatever conclusions you want from the facts, but those are the facts, just the facts. My name is Major Mike Webb, and I am running for U.S. Congress. With liberty, honor, and excellence, by God, we shall make America great again. Honest. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.